In November of 1532, in a stone-walled room high in the Peruvian Andes, a prisoner made the most expensive promise in human history. His name was Atahualpa, emperor of the Inca, ruler of 10 million people, and he had just been captured by a ragged band of fewer than 200 Spanish soldiers. Looking at the greed in their eyes, he understood exactly what these strangers had crossed an ocean to find. So he offered them a deal. He pointed to the walls of the room he was held in, a room some 22 feet long and 17 feet wide, and promised to fill it, once with gold and twice more with silver, as high as he could reach in exchange for his freedom. For months, llama trains wound down from the mountains, carrying the accumulated treasure of an entire civilization. Sacred objects, temple walls stripped of their sheathing, statues, cups, jewelry, ornaments hammered over generations. The Spanish watched it pile up an estimated 11 tons of gold and twice as much silver, worth well over $1 billion today. And they did something that tells you everything about this metal. They melted almost all of it down. Priceless works of art, the finest metalwork of the Americas, reduced to plain bars, because bars were easier to divide and ship. And then, with the room filled and the ransom paid in full, they strangled Atahualpa anyway. That was 1532. But the obsession that killed him, the reason 200 men would sail into the unknown, and the reason an emperor believed a room full of metal could buy back his life, that obsession is far older than the Inca. It is older than money, older than writing, older than almost anything we would recognize as civilization. This is the story of gold, a soft, heavy, nearly useless metal that humans have killed for, died for, and reshaped the entire planet to obtain for more than 6,000 years. And the strangest part of the story is that, chemically speaking, it does almost nothing at all. Here is the puzzle at the heart of everything you are about to see. Gold is, by almost every practical measure, a bad material. It is too soft to make a decent tool or a weapon. Pure gold knife would bend the first time you used it. It is too heavy to be convenient. For most of history, it had no industrial use whatsoever. You cannot eat it. It will not keep you warm. In a genuine survival situation, a lump of gold is worth less than a lump of iron or a loaf of bread. And yet, for 6,000 years across every inhabited continent, cultures that had never met, that shared no language, no religion, and no contact, all independently arrived at the same conclusion, that this particular yellow metal was the most precious substance on earth. The Egyptians and the Chinese, the Inca and the Romans, West Africa and Central Asia, none of them coordinated, all of them agreed. So the real question is not what gold does, it is why. Out of the 90-odd naturally occurring elements, why did humanity again and again choose to worship this one? The answer turns out to be hidden in the metal itself, in its chemistry, its rarity, and one almost magical property that no other affordable material shares. To understand it, we have to go back to the very beginning. Not to the Spanish, not to the Inca, but to a grave dug on the shore of the Black Sea nearly 7,000 years ago. In 1972, a construction crew digging near the Bulgarian city of Varna cut into the edge of an ancient cemetery. What archaeologists found there rewrote the history of human wealth. In the graves of Varna, dating to around 4,500 BC, lay the oldest worked gold ever discovered, more than 6 kilograms of it, over 3,000 individual objects, beads and ornaments and plates of hammered metal. This gold is older than the pyramids. It is older than the wheel. It is older than writing itself. And already, at the very dawn of metalworking, the pattern was set. Most of the graves at Varna held little or nothing, but a handful were loaded with gold. One man, archaeologists call him simply the chieftain, was buried with 1.5 kilos of it, including golden ornaments that had been placed deliberately over his genitals nearly 7,000 years ago. Before nations, before money, gold already meant power, and power already meant a tiny few holding almost all of it. But why gold? The answer comes down to a short list of properties that, taken together, no other material could match. Gold does not rust. It does not tarnish, corrode, or decay. A gold coin pulled from a 2,000-year-old shipwreck comes up as bright as the day it was struck, while iron dissolves into rust and silver turns black. To ancient peoples who watched everything around them rot, age, and die, here was a substance that seemed immortal, an incorruptible metal that carried the color of the sun. It was rare enough to be precious, but soft enough that a person with simple tools could shape it into anything. It was, in a very literal sense, the perfect symbol for things that were supposed to last forever: gods, kings, and the dead. No civilization understood that symbolism better than Egypt. To the Egyptians, gold was not merely valuable, it was divine. The actual flesh of the gods, the substance of the sun god Ra himself, imperishable and eternal. And Egypt had something almost no one else did, an enormous supply of it. To the south lay Nubia, a land so rich in gold that its very name may come from the Egyptian word for the metal. For thousands of years, Egyptian expeditions and enslaved miners tore gold from the deserts of Nubia, crushing quartz by hand and washing the dust from the rock under a merciless sun. It was brutal, lethal work, and it made the pharaohs the richest rulers on earth. You have seen where some of that gold ended up. When Howard Carter opened the tomb of the boy king Tutankhamun in 1922, he found a burial dripping in it, and Tutankhamun was a minor pharaoh who died as a teenager. His innermost coffin alone was made of over 100 kilograms of solid gold. His death mask, that famous, serene, golden face, has become one of the most recognized objects on the planet. And all of it was buried deliberately in the dark forever. Because to the Egyptians, the point of gold was not to spend it. The point was to carry your divinity and your power into the afterlife, wrapped in a metal that would never decay, so that a dead king could become, quite literally, golden and eternal. For most of Egyptian history, gold was not money. You could not buy bread with it. It belonged to temples, to pharaohs, to the gods. But that was about to change. A few hundred miles to the north, in a kingdom obsessed, not with the afterlife, but with trade, someone was about to take this sacred metal and turn it into the most powerful invention in economic history. The place was Lydia, a wealthy kingdom in what is now Western Turkey, and the time was around 600 BC. The Lydians had a natural advantage, a river called the Pactolus that ran, quite literally, with gold, its sands full of a pale natural alloy of gold and silver called electrum. And the Lydians did something no one had quite done before. They took small, standardized lumps of this metal, stamped them with an official mark, guaranteeing their weight and purity, and used them as a medium of exchange. They invented coinage. It is difficult to overstate what this unleashed. Before coins, wealth was clumsy. You traded cattle, grain, bars of metal that had to be weighed and tested with every transaction. A stamped gold coin changed everything. Now value was portable, divisible. A soldier could be paid. A stranger's money could be accepted on sight. Markets exploded. The most famous Lydian king, Croesus, refined the system further, minting the first pure gold coins and accumulating a fortune so legendary that 26 centuries later, we still say a wealthy person is rich as Croesus. But there is a warning buried in his story, one that echoes through this entire history. Croesus, drunk on his own golden wealth, went to war against the rising empire of Persia. According to legend, an oracle told him that if he attacked, he would destroy a great empire. He did. The empire he destroyed was his own. His gold could not buy him victory. Persia crushed Lydia, seized the treasury, and the man whose name meant infinite wealth ended his days a prisoner. Gold, it turns out, makes an extraordinary servant and a catastrophic master, a lesson the Romans were about to learn on a scale the world had never seen. Rome ran on gold. Its standard coin, the aureus, paid the legions that conquered the Mediterranean world, and the promise of gold drove that conquest outward in an ever-widening spiral. When the Emperor Trajan smashed the kingdom of Dacia, modern Romania, in the early 2nd century, he seized a hoard so vast that it staggers belief. By some ancient estimates, over 160 tons of gold. Rome celebrated for 123 days. Trajan flooded the capital with the loot, funding enormous public works, and the value of gold across the entire empire reportedly dropped from the sheer quantity dumped into circulation. But an empire built on gold has a fatal weakness, and Rome discovered it slowly. Then, all at once, gold and silver are finite. As the conquest slowed and the mines emptied, Rome could no longer find enough precious metal to pay its soldiers and fund its sprawling bureaucracy. So the emperors did something that has tempted every ruler since. They cheated. They began quietly reducing the amount of real gold and silver in each coin, mixing in cheaper base metals, while insisting the coin was still worth the same. A denarius that was nearly pure silver under Augustus was 2 centuries later barely 5% silver. The rest a worthless alloy dressed up as money. People are not stupid. Merchants noticed the coins felt lighter, looked wrong, wore differently. Trust collapsed, prices soared. What we would now call inflation tore through the Roman economy, and the debased currency became one of the slow poisons that helped bring down the Western Empire. Rome had learned the hard way that you cannot conjure gold out of nothing, which is precisely why for the next 1,500 years, humanity's most brilliant minds became obsessed with doing exactly that. If gold was the source of all power and gold was finite, then one question consumed the ancient and medieval world. Could you make it? Could you take a cheap common metal like lead and somehow transform it into gold? This was the dream of alchemy, and for over 1,000 years it was not a fringe superstition. It was the cutting edge of human knowledge, pursued in secret laboratories from Alexandria to Baghdad to the courts of Europe. The alchemists believed that all metals were, in a sense, striving to become gold, that gold was the perfect mature form of metal and that lead was simply gold that hadn't finished growing. If they could only find the right catalyst, a legendary substance called the Philosopher's Stone, they could speed nature up and complete the transformation in an afternoon. They spent lifetimes heating, mixing, distilling, and dissolving, recording their failures in deliberately obscure code so that rivals could not steal their secrets. One of the greatest scientific minds in all of human history was, in private, a devoted alchemist. Isaac Newton, the man who explained gravity, who invented calculus, who decoded the motion of the planets, spent more of his life writing about alchemy and the pursuit of gold than he ever spent on physics. Over 1 million words in secret, chasing the Philosopher's Stone. The alchemists never succeeded, of course. You cannot turn lead into gold with a furnace because the difference between them lives inside the atom's nucleus, a place no medieval fire could reach. But in their endless failed experiments, their obsession with measuring, purifying, and combining, they accidentally invented the tools and methods that would become modern chemistry. The dream of fake gold gave birth to real science. And while Europe's geniuses burned lifetimes trying to create gold from nothing, other Europeans found a faster way to get it. They simply went and took someone else's. We began this story in a room in the Andes, and now we return to it. The Spanish conquest of the Americas was, above everything else, a hunt for gold. Driven by legends of El Dorado, a mythical king so rich he coated himself in gold dust, conquistadors like Hernán Cortés and Francisco Pizarro drove into 2 continents with a ferocity that reshaped the world. Cortés toppled the Aztec Empire. Pizarro, with fewer than 200 men, brought down the Inca and extracted Atahualpa's impossible ransom, that room filled to the reach of a man's arm. The scale of what followed is almost incomprehensible. Over the next 3 centuries, Spain shipped a torrent of gold and silver across the Atlantic. In the mountains of Bolivia, at a place called Potosi, the Spanish found a literal mountain of silver and worked it with the forced labor of hundreds of thousands of indigenous people and enslaved Africans in conditions so lethal that Potosi became known. The treasure fleets that carried this wealth home were so valuable, they redrew the map of European power and drew the pirates and privateers of every rival nation onto the seas to hunt them. But the gold of the Americas came at a cost, measured in the near destruction of entire civilizations. Millions died. From the violence of conquest, from the brutality of the mines, and above all from European diseases against which they had no defense. And here is the final irony. All that plundered gold did not make Spain strong. It made Spain lazy and inflated. So much treasure poured in that prices across Europe spiraled, the same inflation that had rotted Rome and Spain. Instead of building industry, simply spent its golden river on wars until it was bankrupt several times over. The Inca lost everything, and the empire that destroyed them squandered the spoils within a few generations. The gold outlasted them both. By now, a pattern has emerged that you cannot unsee. Gold does not create lasting wealth, it moves it, concentrates it, and reveals what people truly are. And by the 17th and 18th centuries, the nations of the world took the final step. They stopped treating gold as merely valuable and made it the very definition of money itself. The idea was a government would hold a reserve of physical gold in a vault, and every unit of paper money it printed could, in theory, be exchanged for a fixed amount of that gold. Your banknote was a promise, and the promise was backed by metal you could hold in your hand. This was the gold standard, and fittingly, one of the men who helped establish it in Britain was Isaac Newton himself, who, having failed to make gold as an alchemist, spent the last decades of his life as master of the Royal Mint, guarding the nation's real gold. Under the gold standard, gold became the anchor of the entire global economy. Nations hoarded it, went to war partly to protect it, and measured their strength by the size of their vault. It imposed a brutal honesty on governments. You could not simply print money, because every note had to be covered by metal that was genuinely scarce. For a certain kind of thinker, this was gold's finest hour, the discipline of a metal no politician could conjure. But that same scarcity, in a growing modern world, would eventually become a K. And before the nations of the world would finally break free of it, gold had one last great madness to inflict on ordinary people, a fever that would send hundreds of thousands of them charging into the wilderness with a shovel and a dream. On a January morning in 1848, a carpenter named James Marshall was building a sawmill on a river in California when he noticed something glinting in the water. "It made my heart thump," he later said, "for I was certain it was gold." That single glint set off one of the largest voluntary human migrations in history. Within 2 years, some 300,000 people had abandoned their lives and poured into California from across the United States and around the world. The 49ers, named for the year the rush truly exploded, 1849. They came by wagon across deserts and by ship around the tip of South America, a brutal months-long voyage. A sleepy village called San Francisco went from a few hundred people to tens of thousands almost overnight. Fortunes were made in days and lost in hours. But the real story of every gold rush is not the handful who struck it rich. It is the vast majority who found nothing, who died of disease or exhaustion or violence, who spent everything they had to reach the gold fields and went home broken. The people who reliably got rich were not the miners. They were the ones selling the shovels, the food, the whiskey, and the passage. A young man named Levi Strauss arrived in San Francisco not to dig, but to sell hard-wearing trousers to the men who did. His name is still on the jeans you can buy today. The California rush was only the first. The fever spread to Australia, to South Africa, to the frozen Klondike in the Yukon, where in the late 1892, a new wave of desperate dreamers hauled themselves over ice-choked mountain passes for a shot at the gold. Each rush followed the same arc. Rumor, stampede, boom, and bust. Each one pushed the frontier of the modern world outward, built cities where there had been wilderness, and left behind ghost towns and broken men. And each one proved the same ancient truth that Atahualpa and Cruces had learned before them, that the promise of gold moves human beings to do things that nothing else on earth can. You might assume that in our modern world of digital money and global finance, gold would finally have lost its grip. It has not. On the 15th of August, 1971, the President of the United States, Richard Nixon, went on television and severed the last link between the dollar and gold, ending the gold standard for good. From that day, no major currency on earth has been backed by metal. Money became, purely and simply, a matter of trust and government decree. In theory, gold should have become just another commodity, pretty but obsolete. Instead, the world's central banks still sit on top of roughly 35,000 tons of it, locked in vaults like Fort Knox and the Bank of England, deep beneath our modern cities. Because gold is the thing people run to when they stop trusting everything else. In every crisis, every crash, every war, every collapse of confidence, the price of gold climbs, because 5,000 years of history have hardwired one instinct into our species. When the world feels like it is ending, it is faith, pure and simple, passed down from Varna to Wall Street. But gold still has a darker side. Out of sight of the glittering shop windows, much of the world's gold today is torn from the ground in devastating ways. Vast open-pit mines that swallow whole landscapes and small-scale operations that use toxic mercury and cyanide to pull tiny flecks of gold from crushed rock, poisoning rivers. Blood gold funds armed conflict in parts of Africa, just as it once funded the conquistadors. And here is a fact that captures the whole absurd, eternal obsession. Almost all of the gold ever mined in human history, an estimated 200,000 tons of it, still exists, right now, somewhere on Earth. Because gold never decays, the wedding ring on someone's finger today may contain atoms that were once part of a pharaoh's mask, or an Inca sun disk, or a Roman coin. We do not consume gold. We simply pass it endlessly, from hand to hand, across the centuries. So we are left, at the end, with the question we started with. Why? Why has our species spent 6,000 years killing and dying and tearing the planet apart for a soft yellow metal that does almost nothing? The honest answer is unsettling. Gold has no magic. It has no power that we did not give it. Its entire value rests on a single, unspoken agreement repeated across every culture and every century, the shared belief. Strip that belief away, and it is just a heavy, pretty rock. Gold is a story we have all agreed to tell, and the reason the story has lasted longer than any empire is precisely because the metal itself lasts longer than any empire. It does not rust, it does not fade, and so it became the perfect vessel for the one thing humans crave above all others: permanence in a world where everything else turns to dust. Croesus drowned in it and lost his kingdom. Rome debased it. Spain squandered it. Newton chased it. And 300,000 49ers broke their bodies for it. And through all of it, the gold simply endured, indifferent, unchanged, waiting to be melted down and reshaped for the next set of hands that believed it could make them immortal. It has outlasted the pharaohs, who called it the flesh of the gods. And it will almost certainly outlast us too. The most precious thing about gold in the end is not that it is rare or beautiful or useful, and for a species that knows always that it will. That turned out to be the most valuable property of all.